Rome, whose legions were unrivaled on solid ground, regarded the ocean as something alien and threatening. Their civilization was built on stone roads, fortified camps, and the iron discipline of the foot soldier. The sea belonged to others, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, and above all the Carthaginians, people for whom waves were a second home and ships an extension of their own limbs. But history gave Rome no choice. Either seize control of the sea or be consumed by it, along with every enemy that sailed it. This is the story of how a nation of farmers and soldiers, people who had never built a warship or studied naval strategy, was compelled to become the undisputed rulers of the Mediterranean. At the outset of the 3rd century BC, Rome was, at its core, a land-based agrarian society. Its citizens were shaped by hills and fields, not coastlines. The ocean was viewed not as an opportunity, but as a source of superstition and dread, populated, in the popular imagination, by mythical horrors lurking beneath the surface. Roman culture, military doctrine, and economic life were all anchored to terra firma. The legion was Rome's supreme weapon, disciplined, methodical, capable of erecting a fortified camp overnight and grinding down any enemy in close formation. All of that prowess evaporated the moment a soldier stepped onto a rolling deck. There was no way to form a tight battle line on open water, no ground to dig into, no familiar footing to rely on. Meanwhile, Carthage ruled the western Mediterranean with absolute confidence. Heir to centuries of Phoenician seafaring tradition, Carthage maintained a vast fleet of swift, expertly crewed warships. Their sailors had mastered the art of naval combat, fast maneuvers, precise attack angles, the lethal ramming strike. Against such opponents, any Roman fleet would have been obliterated within hours. This vulnerability became impossible to ignore during the First Punic War, triggered by a dispute over Sicily. On land, Roman legions performed well, steadily capturing Carthaginian-held settlements across the island. But every gain was undermined by a simple reality. Carthage controlled the sea. It could resupply its garrisons at will, reinforce besieged positions, and launch raids along the Italian coastline with complete impunity. No land victory would stick as long as the enemy could freely move troops and supplies by water. Rome faced a choice: abandon the fight for Sicily, or do something that seemed nearly impossible. Build a battle fleet from nothing, in the middle of a war. They chose the impossible. What followed was one of antiquity's most remarkable feats of engineering and organization. Early in the conflict, fortune handed Rome an extraordinary advantage. A Carthaginian warship, a quinquereme, the most powerful warship of the era, ran aground during a storm off the Italian coast and was captured largely intact. For Rome, this was not merely a trophy. It was a blueprint. Roman engineers and craftsmen dismantled it piece by piece, studying the curvature of the hull, the placement of oar banks, the construction of the mast and rigging. Rather than copying every detail blindly, they adapted what they learned to match their own manufacturing strengths, producing a design that was slightly heavier and more rugged than the Carthaginian original, built less for speed and more for stability in close combat. The construction effort that followed was staggering. Timber was harvested from forests across Italy, transported to hastily constructed coastal shipyards, and assembled by thousands of workers operating on something close to a production line system. Frames, keels, and planking were standardized so that components could be interchanged and assembly accelerated. According to ancient accounts, over 120 warships were constructed in roughly 2 months. A figure that sounds improbable, but reflects just how completely Rome mobilized its resources when survival demanded it. Ships, however, are useless without people who know how to sail them. Rome had almost none. To operate a single quinquereme required around 300 oarsmen whose movements had to be perfectly synchronized. Rather than send untrained recruits out to sea, where mistakes would be fatal and ships would be lost, Roman commanders devised a solution of striking pragmatism. They built wooden platforms on land, fitted with rowing benches and actual oars, and drilled their recruits there. Officers kept time with drums or flutes while thousands of men practiced their stroke in unison, day after day, until the motion became automatic. When the ships were finally launched and the crews boarded them for the first time, they already knew how to row together. What they lacked in seafaring experience, they made up for in disciplined repetition. Still, Rome knew that even with new ships and synchronized rowers, it could not win a conventional naval battle against Carthage. The Carthaginians had generations of tactical refinement on their side. Rome needed a way to override that advantage entirely. The answer came from an anonymous engineer who understood something fundamental. If you cannot beat the enemy on their terms, force them onto yours. The device he created was called the corvus, the raven. It was a heavy boarding bridge roughly 11 meters long, mounted on a rotating vertical pole at the bow of a Roman ship. At its far end hung a heavy iron spike shaped like a bird's beak. When an enemy vessel drew close enough, the bridge was released, crashing down onto the opposing deck. The spike drove into the wood and locked both ships together. The Carthaginian captain, in that instant, lost the one thing that made his navy lethal: the freedom to maneuver. And at that moment, Roman soldiers poured across the bridge. A naval engagement became a land battle, fought on floating planks. And on those terms, Rome was supreme. The Corvus was first tested at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC. Carthaginian commanders, seeing the unusual structures mounted on Roman bows, assumed they were clumsy and irrelevant. They attacked confidently, and were stunned when their ships were seized, boarded, and taken. Rome, which had never won a significant sea battle, destroyed the Carthaginian fleet. 6 years later, at the Battle of Cape Ecnomus, one of the largest naval engagements of the ancient world, the same tactics were deployed at massive scale. Nearly 700 ships clashed. Rome's wedge formation and boarding strategy again proved decisive. The road to Africa lay open. Over time, the Corvus was abandoned. It sat high on the ship's bow and dramatically shifted the vessel's center of gravity, making it dangerously unstable in rough weather. Several entire Roman fleets were lost to storms rather than enemy action, the heavy boarding bridges turning ships into death traps. By then, however, Rome no longer needed a crutch. Its sailors had grown experienced, its shipbuilders inventive. Larger and more powerful warships appeared. Massive vessels equipped with artillery platforms, war towers, ballistae, and catapults, adapted from siege warfare. Roman naval tactics grew more sophisticated, incorporating lessons absorbed from Greek and Carthaginian tradition, while adding distinctly Roman elements of mass, discipline, and coordination. By the mid-1st century BC, Rome's dominance at sea was complete enough to present a new kind of problem. Piracy had exploded across the Mediterranean on a catastrophic scale. Criminal fleets, operating out of bases along the Cilician and Dalmatian coasts, were disrupting grain shipments and terrorizing coastal communities. In 67 BC, the Senate granted Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus sweeping authority over the entire sea and a force of 500 warships and 120,000 soldiers. Pompey divided the Mediterranean into 13 sectors, each assigned its own commander and squadron, and launched a coordinated westward sweep that systematically closed every escape route. In 3 months, the threat was crushed. It was a demonstration not just of Roman military power, but of an organizational capability unmatched in the ancient world. Rome had come an enormous distance. The civilization that once built roads instead of ships, that feared the open water and had no word for seamanship in its own cultural vocabulary, had transformed itself into the uncontested master of an entire sea, a body of water it now called Mare Nostrum, our sea. That transformation was not inevitable. It was willed into existence through necessity, pragmatism, and an unrelenting refusal to accept limitations as permanent. The Corvus, the land-based rowing camps, the captured Carthaginian blueprint, none of it was elegant. All of it worked. Rome did not conquer the sea by becoming something it was not. It conquered the sea by carrying onto the water exactly what it already was: disciplined, organized, and utterly unwilling to lose.